Okay, welcome everyone this evening to the first MLE Friends talk of 2023. As you know, this is a series that we've dedicated to the MLE Friends community, and it's really meant to showcase some of the work and personalities within our association. So many of the people who are doing really exciting work in the sciences, in contemplative fields, in philosophy, in the humanities. And so this evening, we're really delighted to have Wolfgang Lukas, who's a longtime member, well, a recent member, but someone who's been involved for a long time in Mind and Life Europe. And he'll be sharing much of his experience, not just as a scientist, but also as someone who's interested in collaborative contemplative approaches to academia, which is definitely a subject we're talking a lot about at Mind and Life Europe these days. So thank you, Wolfgang, for joining us. And I'd just like to briefly introduce you for those who don't know you and who may be watching this later on the YouTube channel. So Wolfgang Lukas holds a Master's of Science degree in physics from Graz University of Technology and a PhD in physics from the University of Innsbruck. He was a member of the Atlas collaboration at CERN from 2010 to 2017. Intrigued by the vast potential and challenge of bridging scientific collaboration with contemplative practices and community building, he initiated the Contemplative Scientific Collaboration Project in 2016 and the Mindful Researchers Initiative in 2020 with the support of the Yoga Science Foundation. He contributes to research projects and publications related to open and collaborative science. Wolfgang began exploring contemplative practices in 2005 with an initial focus on Theravada Buddhism and a growing interest in Dzogchen. His heart also lights up for process facilitation, the art of hosting and counsel, participatory decision-making. He's a certified moderator for systemic consensing, poetry, storytelling, filmmaking, deep ecology, contract improvisation, and much more. Wolfgang has been participating in MLE events since 2013, while supporting the Esri community building and hosting team since 2017. So we're really happy to finally hear from you a little bit more about your story, Wolfgang. So the floor is yours for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johanna, for the kind introduction. And it's an, extraordinary pleasure for me and honor to be, that you have me to give a talk, a presentation. And so I'll get going, because otherwise I will just sit there with a beaming smile. So I will share my slides and let's see if it works. All right, you can see? Ah, yeah, all right. So yeah, the chosen theme for the talk is towards a contemplative collaborative research culture in academia and beyond. What it actually is a story of both a personal journey with all its unexpected twists and turns, and also a collection and web of ideas, inspirations, etc. Many of which have somehow come across my way along the way. I hope I will be able to give due credit to everybody who contributed, who brought these ideas to me, and who helped shape my path. And that is an inspiration that I have for this talk. But undoubtedly, I will forget some people. So please, do not be angry, but have a word with me afterwards if I should have forgotten to mention you. All right, so I'll get going with two guiding questions. It's to just drop a little seed or throw a drop into the water, and we'll pick this question up later. So here are actually three questions. What would a contemplative collaborative research culture be like for each of us? What might it achieve for the benefit of all beings? And how can we support its realization? And as you maybe have some thoughts coming up, maybe there are also thoughts of, well, what does this actually mean? Is this actually a good idea, etc., etc. undoubtedly, these are questions that I have pondered on my journey. And that's why I want to share them with you. And there's one more question, and I'll also be returning to this during the talk. What would be the most ambitious research question or program that you can envision with your wildest imagination and all your heart? And maybe there's something coming up already now. Maybe it's something that comes up over time. Maybe nothing comes up. All of that is fine. But as I said, we will return to such questions throughout the talk. The talk will contain several puzzling ingredients with which we're going to puzzle a bit. Some of them are highlighted on these puzzle pieces as logos. There is the Mind and Life Europe logo, also logos of CERN and the Atlas experiment from my journey through the world of physics research. There's a Yoga Science Foundation logo, and I'll say more about that later. And by and large, the main ingredients are, as pointed out on the left, scientific collaboration, contemplative practice, participatory methods, and community building. The image on the left is from the monastery Stift Heiligenkreuz in Austria, which I visited in 2005. The whole journey that I'm going to share with you is actually a quite strange path, and I start with a picture from childhood, where you see me with one of my early passions, playing chess. I was also very an avid juggler of numbers and math and so on. And here, two of us are actually playing against my best friend at the time, Helfried, who was actually better than the two of us combined. During my youth, I got intrigued, especially by this well-known book by Stephen Hawking, to become passionate about physics, about astronomy and astrophysics, and so on. And so it was not a big surprise that I started studying physics, first at Graz University of Technology. But I was not a straight student that was going directly for the degree. I did lots of other things. There was, for instance, I got quite involved in a very early online community, hence also my love for community and community building already then. I joined in 1997, but it was an online community purely in text form that existed since 1994. So this is kind of Facebook way before Facebook. And then also along the way, filmmaking became a rekindled passion for me. Also my brother, who is here on kind of next to me on the left side. This was a photo from one of our shooting days when we were doing a very ambitious low budget or even no budget feature-length film with a well-known, among others, a well-known Austrian actor, Andreas Witasek, who is on the bottom left. The director is in the center on the bottom. This is basically a collection of very ambitious friends. And so my knack for ambitious projects in which you rather invest money rather than getting anything out of was already apparent at the time. And it was a very precious, if not also sometimes difficult experience or challenging experience for which I'm deeply grateful, and yes, certainly shaped me. Along the way, however, also I came across Buddhism and meditation, not completely by coincidence. There is a history behind that. The first place in which I started to meditate was Purek in the beautiful region of the Salzburg Mountains. And this place was founded by Brother David Steindl-Rast and the Zen monk Vanya Palmas. And this is where I did my first meditation retreat with tremendous challenges, and kind of I wanted to give up and like break down in tears and whatnot, even though it was only a 3-day retreat. It was an incredibly precious experience. It's a beautiful place, so I show you a couple of more pictures. I was tempted to only show pictures from there, including cows, etc. But yeah, that would be for another talk. This is a tree that you see here on the left that actually gave me comfort in difficult times more than once. the times were not difficult because of the place or the people, but of course due to whatever goes on internally when one starts to meditate and is not yet not even slightly familiar with pains or other stuff that shows up. So I would say my childhood of meditation, maybe I'm still in my childhood, but my early childhood I spent mostly at this place in Purek. On this picture on the right now, you see on the left side the woman who was running the place or organizing the place at the time. Basically, it was organized and run in a Zen way, or a Zen and Christian mysticism way. Her name was Pepi. She was is a very pragmatic, down-to-earth woman. And on the right side, you see Hannes Huber, who was my meditation teacher in this retreat and in most other retreats that I did henceforth. Wonderful teacher. So meditation was now suddenly also part of the equation, you could say, as difficult the equation might have seemed. And one person who has been highly influential for me, even becoming interested in Buddhism, was my dear late uncle, whom you see here in a picture, I think from about 2009. He gave me Buddhist literature and started talking with me about Buddhism when I was not at all prepared for it, kind of saying, you know, a car isn't actually a car because it's empty and you can break it down in all its parts and all these parts are also empty. And I was like, what? Yes, it sounds intriguing, but I'm somehow also lost, but also intrigued, but also skeptical. And so it went on for a long time. But then some things shifted, actually due to one particular experience. It came unexpectedly, and suddenly things started to make at least a little bit more sense. And I lost my skepticism and started to embrace also the wonderful Buddhist literature that I had on my bookshelf, thanks to my uncle. And I started having wonderful, spiritual conversations with him. So I might say it was my first Dharma buddy. At least consciously, I would say. And now I fast forward a little bit. I eventually finished my studies at Graz University of Technology and got the master's degree, and then got the wonderful opportunity, largely thanks to, of course, to supporters and largely to these two professors, one from my university in Graz and one from my then future university or alma mater in Innsbruck, who encouraged me and also wrote recommendation letters, so I could actually get a spot in a doctoral program at CERN. At first, I didn't even want to accept it. I thought, well, I'm surely not qualified. Maybe I should do something else. But then I went there. And so I owe a huge deal of gratitude to these two gentlemen, but also to, of course, many other people and supporters, my family and partners, etc. Now, here you see, on the right side, an aerial view of the Geneva region, with, in this yellow, almost circular line, the location where the so-called Large Hadron Collider underground accelerator tunnel and accelerator ring of 27 kilometers length is located, around on average 100 meters underground. So even thinking about the challenge of building such a tunnel, but then never mind all the technology that goes into it, which I will not introduce in detail, is quite mind-boggling. And that's just one large component of a bunch of complexes which contain lots of other technology that goes way back to the 1950s. And on the left side, you see an image of that was taken during the construction or maintenance of the Atlas detector. So I was then part of the Atlas collaboration or Atlas experiment, and there was a detector, a measurement device, a large measurement device for detecting signatures of particle collisions, high energy particle collisions, as was the main area of experimentation at CERN. and still is. And here you see also, if you can recognize this little man standing there, just to imagine the size of this. And then where this guy stands, then if he's no longer there and all the components are in, then the whole thing is just packed with electronics and technology. And so even the assembly of that, engineering-wise and planning-wise and logistic-wise and so on, is of course a huge challenge. So of course I was very fascinated by all this, very impressed and inspired. What also inspired me a lot was the fact that CERN was really a very international collaborative undertaking. So here you see, this is, I think by now even outdated, 22 member states of CERN and several states, associate members or states in accession to membership. So there is also then not only an international collaboration aspect, but, and you see this on the next slide, even further nations around the globe that are somehow affiliated as observer states like Japan, Russia, USA, and others, with the numbers of people that come from these places. So unfortunately, there are only few people, for instance, from the African continent, and also relatively few from South American continent. Nonetheless, it spans almost the entire globe. And what really amazed me was that I even found that there were people sometimes working directly on the same experiment of countries that were historically not always such good friends, like USA and Russia, or even Israel and Palestine. And I met people from both countries. And so these aspects really deeply impressed and inspired me. And okay, well, here you see me in my office. All the walls are plastered with notes and sketches and etc. and calculations by also my office colleagues who were really experts in their fields. And I felt quite inferior and felt like an imposter there, and thought, what am I really doing there? And then sure enough, there was a time when I thought, okay, I think I now know what I'm doing here. So it was then really coming to that project that would become the heart of my PhD thesis. And I thought, okay, now I can really prove myself. And I tried to kind of, do the extra work, and worked really late at night and drove myself to exhaustion. And then landed, I would say fortunately, because it's socially the better alternative to complete exit, was a burnout, a panic attack. It was, of course, a horrible experience, but it helped me slow down, reconsider. And during my reconvalescent time, I also did a meditation retreat, again in Purek. And all of that helped me to become, well, on one hand, at least for a while, more gentle with myself. I mean, I think it also lasted a bit, but of course, there's a tendency that people have. But it was certainly a very precious, even though very challenging experience, which somehow slightly humorously you could find on this image here. And it not only led me to reconsider my life and think, oh, maybe there is also something else that I want to pay attention to in life, which then turned out to be a little bit dangerous, almost like a Trojan horse. I then went on a journey to the United States. Basically, it was the first journey that I did out of really an inner impulse of not needing to do something because it was for the job or for something else. And during that, I met this wonderful man who became a dear friend and mentor and supporter, Scott Anderson, at a conference in the San Francisco area. He was the director of the Yoga Science Foundation. And unbeknownst to me, he was there at the same conference as a talent scout, which he only told me later, or maybe I only picked it up later. And he was basically looking for people who might be interested in what he called yoga science. And he was very intrigued by meeting me and finding out that there was a physicist working at CERN, which was a quite well-known, prestigious place on one hand, but also having an interest in consciousness and meditation, which was partly basically the theme or kind of nucleus of that conference. And anyway, so he started proposing to me. I mean, we stayed in touch, and yeah, I could support you if you want to explore some conferences. And at first I was quite skeptical and thought, can I accept something like that? And what does this wonderful man want from me? But I then realized that was really a very genuine impulse. And I decided to trust it. And with this beautiful experience, I want to make a short break and invite a moment for reflection, which you may, if you want, engage in, to maybe take a silence for a minute and reflect on the question of which mentor or mentors have unexpectedly shown up in your life. What qualities did they bring into your life? And how has their appearance shaped your path? Let's take a short moment of silence. And if a name or a quality or something brief enters your heart or your heart mind that you would like to share, I would like to invite you to the following. It's called Chatterfall. When you type it in the chat, don't press enter yet. Just type that name or that word, or maybe a few words, but keep it short if you can. If you want to type anything at all, type it, but don't press enter yet. I will give a little bit of time. So I will not know if you're ready or not, but then I will ask you at some point. I'll wait a couple more seconds. So this is an experiment. We'll see how it goes. Maybe yeah, we will see. And okay, so maybe by now there's something that you were able to type in. Again, short is good. And I haven't checked the chat yet, but now I would ask you to, press enter now, and then you might see if several of us are doing it at the same time. Oh yes, now it falls in like a waterfall. That's why it's called Chatterfall. I learned this recently at another event. I'm Guru Rinpoche, my Alexander technique teacher in New York, an embodiment of authenticity, unconditional love, deep listening, solidarity, reassurance. Dujom Rinpoche, Anna Weisman, Amy Apici, and Otto Scharmer, serious play. Completely transformed my life and transformational. And there's Gurdjieff too. So I hope it was okay for you that I read what you typed in the chat. Thank you very much, indeed. So let's return to the flow of the presentation now with these journeys, not maps, also comes up. Thank you very much. So Scott had quite miraculously, I would say, entered my life. And again, he was the director of the Yoga Science Foundation that actually formerly used to be called, I think, the Yoga Research and Education Center, and then Yoga Research and Education Foundation, and then changed the name. And he had this vision that he formulated as a yoga science. And this I took from the website. It is no longer online because the Yoga Science Foundation closed down its operations about a year ago. But what he was passionate about was to think about the words yoga and science in their deep sense as such, but then to think about how do they usually are used together. It's usually one of the other or one as the other. Oftentimes like yoga as a science, or yoga in the widest sense of all that yoga or yogic traditions might encompass. And vice versa, also something like science studies yoga, the science of meditation, precious as it is, he wondered that there might be something there that still is missing. And he was wondering, what if you bring these circles to an actual and genuine and full overlap, and then think of that which arises in the middle as a yoga science? And he presents this or describes this as a third view that sees them in a dynamic relationship, a kind of interdisciplinary marriage, perhaps even yielding an offspring with novel and auspicious qualities. And related to that, or behind that, is also a notion, I mean, this obviously has to do with his own life journey and experience, both through science and yoga, but also something that has been formulated in one way or another by Francisco Varela, or by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, or B. Ellen Wallace, or others, to think about what might it be if there are, what might happen if there are hybrids, people who are actually trained, well trained, both in science and in yoga, both in science and a contemplative practice or practices or traditions or wisdom traditions, and in some unexpected and unforeseeable way, bring them together and bring something forth from that. Now, it's also a quite tall order, because what does it mean to be a good scientist? I mean, one can receive training, of course, as I have also, but I don't know if I would consider myself therefore a good scientist, but maybe an enthusiastic scientist. What does it mean to be a good yogi, or like a really deep or passionate yogi? So I don't know if I qualify at all for this, but surely there are people who do, and there will be people who do, and that is part of the vision. Now, thanks to Scott's generous support, I was able to visit lots of conferences. There's one that I didn't put on here, which was the Todi Week, the former Cortona Week. But anyway, this was part of the melange, from more out there to more hyper-rational consciousness research events, more intellectual events, more spiritual events, and some that are very much in between. And of particular importance for me, of course, were, this is not going to surprise you, coming on the next slide, Mind and Life Europe, which I encountered already in 2013, also thanks to Scott, who kind of made me aware of it. So I visited the first symposium by Mind and Life Europe in Berlin, and felt like a complete outsider, but also I was felt very welcome at the same time. And of course, this brought up lots of emotions and whatnot. And there were some voices which I am often remembering, and that were particularly important for me. I was not really able to formulate that my real worry or kind of what was on my heart, both as a hope and as a fear, was this question of finding connection and belonging. Do I really belong here? Can I be part of this? And of course, I didn't quite know that many people, even if they're coming from a field that is more closely related, maybe through philosophy, psychology, or neuroscience, more closely related to the themes that were shown at the conference, would also have such worries or concerns. So these are probably quite universal things here. And I remember three voices in particular. There was a wonderful man named Tony from New Zealand, a doctor, I think, who, when I shared in a group sharing setting in one of the workshops or breakouts there, I shared somehow what was on my heart, even though I couldn't really quite give words to it. And he looked at me with this very compassionate attitude, and with also watery eyes, as I also had. And he said, "It takes time." And it so touched my heart when he said that. It takes time. And for whatever challenge one might face, there was this wonderful and timely and timeless wisdom just in these very simple words. And in a workshop by Mark Williams, where he had talked about how he had his own journey into MBSR and meeting John Kabat-Zinn and so on. And I was quite inspired by that. And I also walked up to him afterwards and somehow formulated again a similar kind of question, but with different words. And he said, "It's scary, isn't it?" And exactly held and embraced me in that moment. And of course, not just me, but everybody who is in such a place with this compassionate reflection. And I also had a short conversation with Arthur Zions and said to him, "Oh, this is, I really want to, I want to make a shift. I'm doing physics, but I want to do something in this field here." And we were having this short conversation. And then he said to me, "Don't throw away the physics." And that was a very precious kind of advice that I think is still like a bit of I don't know, it still does its work, I would say. All right. But these were some voices from this particular event. And just these among, of course, the wonderful presentations and content and connections and friendships speak volumes to the value that cannot be measured of events and like the work that MLE does and the team that has organized this particular event and all these participants. So anyway, before I get lost in this, let's skip 1 year ahead to the first Esri on Fraueninsel in Germany. And there was, of course, again, amongst many beautiful encounters and important elements and connections and inspirations, particularly the screening of the documentary by Franz Reichel, the first part of his trilogy, Monte Grande, What is Life? And I felt, excuse me, so touched and inspired in a way that I didn't know what it was, but something was stirring my heart, and it had to do with some of the things that Francisco had been elucidating and elaborating in these interviews through words, but also maybe through that was beyond the words and still captured on this camera, on this documentary. And I walked up to Amy and said, "I would like to talk with you." And she said, "Yeah, maybe tomorrow morning." So the next morning we had a chat on a bench outside. And I mean, it's one of the many interactions for which I'm deeply grateful to Amy. But also, there was one thing I remember that she also said, she spoke, if I remember this correctly, so if not, then please correct me. But I think she said that Francisco also during his life also was living with and into and through a tension between the researcher who wants to do research in the lab and apply that mind to these questions and challenges, and the practitioner, the meditator, the contemplative, and bring them together, and yet also living with the tension, and maybe these things would somehow be synonymous or part of the equation. So whatever it was that I might now not have sufficiently accurately been telling, it was also something that was also a kind of planting seeds in my heart. Now, a year later, again in Purek. So you recognize maybe the pictures, and here you can see, this is the building, by the way, in which there is the meditation hall, the Zendo, and underneath the sleeping quarters, mostly wooden building, beautiful, very simple, down to earth, and just like, yeah, will forever be my favorite place for meditation, but of course I'm biased. So then again, there was some experience, but in this version, it was a beautiful one. While I was meditating, I was not attending to the breath, but pondering the question, what can I do to, I'm coming from this field of physics and I'm still in it and I'm still doing my PhD. And what might I be able to I don't know, contribute to the field of contemplative science, of which I know so little, and yeah, so but there must be something there, and suddenly an inspiration came, and that was basically, whoops, sorry, giving rise, so right here 2015, although it was formally only launched in 2016, the idea for what became the Contemplative Scientific Collaboration Project, at first by the name Contemplative Collaboration, and later on trying to be more specific, adding the word scientific, which makes, of course, it a little bit more, even more difficult to pronounce, a little bit unwieldy title for a project. But at the heart of it was really the recognition, what is it, or basically the coming together of the questions, what is it that has inspired me so much at CERN? And I will go into this in the next couple of slides. And also the question, what am I already seeing as, or hearing as a need in the field of contemplative science, as much as I am able, to hear such. And the thing that I've often heard was like a yearning for collaboration, for sharing, for a different kind of culture, even though I didn't really formulate it that way at the time. And on the other side of the equation stood, well, beautiful experiences with collaboration, maybe not so much a focus on contemplation at CERN. Without judgment, but just saying, okay, the one that focuses very much on this scientific side, and the other also, but yeah, there is a difference in emphasis on contemplative and collaborative practices or expertise as part of the scientific endeavor. And so this came together as an idea. So I was reflecting, and I want to share some of these reflections with you. What works well at CERN? There was this already mentioned spirit of collaboration, spirit of even like international, crossing borders and institutions and disciplines, but also a culture of sharing resources, which was going on there, and also by necessity, one might say, because of the ambitious research programs for altogether, you could say, almost 70 years now. It was a large-scale organization with well-developed and managed knowledge and data management and collaborative tools that were partly developed in-house by IT teams in the whole collaborative network. There was already a long tradition of hybrid meeting formats that would facilitate international collaboration, because of course not always all these people can be on site, and sometimes they're really distributed around the globe, but still contributing to the research. So this was way even before I went there, and certainly way before hybrid meeting formats became a thing, also more during the COVID pandemic. Tried and tested procedures to safeguard robust research, including very intricate and sometimes painstakingly intricate internal peer review processes before a publication would go out, to really safeguard quality of publications, but also the quality of research itself. There was both a hierarchical top-down structure to organize the whole endeavor and the collaboration and workflows and responsibilities, and also a bottom-up way or culture and processes. So communication and problem solving basically happened at a very horizontal level. And what really impressed me was, even as a PhD student or a master student or anyone, if you had an idea, it didn't matter if you were a junior or senior member of the collaboration, the ideas were evaluated and tested for themselves. And it was not a big deal to talk with people, for the most part, not a big deal to talk with people that you could say were somewhere, on a different scale of the hierarchy. I learned that this was very different at another organization in Geneva, namely the United Nations. But of course, I lack inside knowledge. I just heard this from several conversations, that there was much more of a strict hierarchy there, and more difficulty to talk with people on a different, quote, level, unquote. Organizational principles at CERN I would describe with, of course, not maybe the highest degree of accuracy, but I've heard this term sometimes used as an adhocracy, kind of challenge pops up, and then challenge gets tackled and solved as best as possible, and people come together. And something that is called co-opetition sometimes. It's like a coming together of cooperation and competition. And this is also in the whole design, the whole collaborative design of even having several competing experiments like the Atlas experiment and the CMS experiment, so 2 large experiments. I was part of one of the 2, who would basically tackle the same research questions, but independently, and yet using also partly the same kind of infrastructure. And thereby also to safeguard, like sometimes I think it's called a structured adversarial collaboration that you would have, or maybe now another similar principle is maybe the many labs research and so on. Yeah. And very importantly, the supporting, or more than supporting, role played by lunch and coffee breaks. Indeed, meeting people physically and having chance encounters, and then sometimes talking also about work or some ideas, and then coming to, like, this was just really a thing that I think happened to many people, to come up with very, like, sometimes perhaps even groundbreaking new ideas, or at least something that would help one in one's current challenges with the research or the data analysis or whatnot. So it had both a social component, but also something that would strengthen collaboration, bring new ideas and knowledge exchange. Right. I think I'm getting a little bit carried away by all of this, but all right, let's proceed. So here's some of these, what I might say, perhaps principles that stood out for me as kind of key factors, one might say. Of course, this is my subjective view, that were present at CERN and that I thought would be helpful for something like a contemplative scientific collaboration. Here's a quote from a very interesting book about, largely about the Atlas experiment, but generally about CERN, titled Collisions and Collaboration. And the quote is, "We are always working at the limit of available skills and resources. There's no slack in the system. And to solve unforeseen problems that always crop up, we need to ask non-members to chip in, integrating them into our teams and sharing with them what we have." So this was really part and parcel of the experience at CERN for people. Otherwise, people would generally be lost without the contributions from others, and others would be lost without one's own contributions. And so it was very much in that sense a give and take. I'm not saying it was like a perfect, happy world, therefore, but still that spirit was very, very strong, and you could then say maybe well established. It was a very ambitious, or is a very ambitious research program, also in terms of striving for robustness or significance. So there's this concept of statistical significance expressed in standard deviations, and one kind of really challenging principle, but that was necessary in order to not get lost on wrong tracks, to claim a so-called discovery, for instance, of the Higgs boson in particle physics, requires, by like standards that have been set, a really high statistical significance to guarantee that the result was not chance. One really wants to go the extra mile to make sure of that. Another very important factor in the research is the diligent assessment of not only statistical uncertainties, as is quite common when you have a statistical sample, but also the so-called systematic uncertainties. And I always wonder how that principle might be translated for the benefit of more robust research into fields like, or maybe it is somehow, and I just don't understand yet, but psychological research or studies with, with cohorts. How is that factored in? Again, it might just be my ignorance, but I'm still intrigued by the idea that maybe there is something there. And yeah, very robust internal peer review processes that can last even for a year or more until a paper can actually be published. So just to say, the main result of my particular work and my PhD thesis after many years of work was basically one number and the statistical and systematic uncertainties. I will not explain what this means. It's basically this little data point you see there on the right. This was kind of the main result of the thesis. And the main effort really of the work was in getting to understanding and reducing this second error, the systematic uncertainty, so this plus 0.103, to really be able to, one says control, or to bring down that value, because it was the way larger, potentially way larger degree of uncertainty, because the statistical uncertainty was already quite low in that particular study, because of the luxury of having a large data set of millions of events. That luxury you usually don't have when you do research on a cohort of meditation practitioners, because you don't have millions of practitioners. So obviously this comparison doesn't hold, but just to illustrate the principle of that. Okay, I proceed. Well, large collaborations, it was also just a custom to publish together. So once one has earned their right by doing so-called service work for the collaboration, to become a co-author, one would be a co-author of all the publications during a certain time. And then this is a little bit mind-boggling that one gets about 100 journal publications per year, to which one might have not really contributed even a comma or a dash. But everybody contributes maybe to one publication during a year. And so if you do the math, that would mean 3,000 collaborators in the Atlas experiment, 100 journal publications per year, would mean 30 collaborators for one journal publication per year on average. There's this wonderful quote by Harry Truman, and somehow, yeah, look at nature. I mean, ants don't worry about who gets the credit for building the ant hive, but they get it done, and it helps them live and thrive. So and so it goes on. So a very interesting principle. And that also is maybe by itself, but one could also say, approach this in other ways, a case for slow science. In this case, at CERN, mostly by necessity for the sake of scientific rigor. But the question, another question would be, could there be something like a slow science deliberately in terms of thinking about a contemplative approach to research, not to slow things down, but to reflect more deeply, and maybe thereby something changes in the research culture itself, but also like team culture in one's own experience and well-being, and maybe in various kinds of different views or insights. And so I leave this completely open, but there may be many ways to riff on that theme. Obviously, a challenge that is particularly high in a field like contemplative research is transdisciplinarity. So here I say it with a euphemism, potential there, but also challenge, a daunting challenge. And there is this both uplifting and daunting quote by Evan Thompson at his keynote at the ISCS 2016 by Mind and Life in the US. And he said that every scientific study of mindfulness, I think he said, should have, but could be extended maybe to every scientific study. Why not expand this? Should have an anthropologist, an ethnographer of science, and a cultural historian as part of the team. So when he said that, of course, I was like, yeah. But then, of course, there's the flip side of it is like, oh my God, how, when there is already such a stressful reality for researchers being under so much pressure, now you should also get other people involved, and then finding, common ground and so on. How do you do this? I mean, it just amplifies the challenge. And at the same time, maybe it's worthwhile to amplify the challenge and also develop ways so that it's at the same time not just becomes bigger, but also smaller again, because of, well, at least that's my wish, if it's not wishful thinking, but at least a wish or a vision or hope that this could be increasingly part and parcel of a field such as contemplative science. And then studies could become more, well, I mean, would certainly benefit. I mean, obviously, Evan Thompson, I mean, I'm not sure if I should say they should obviously benefit, because of course the challenge becomes higher, but one can make a case for why it would be beneficial for such studies. And I think this is what Evan Thompson had in mind. So let's go with the potential. Difficulty of languages, of course, in the case of something like physics research or other more technical areas of research, there's some kind of luxury perhaps, because you're basically relying on mathematics as a formal language, and that helps facilitate consensus and lets one go straight for getting higher precision and so on. So it's like that approach, but that's not always possible in all fields, and especially when it gets very transdisciplinary and different disciplines don't really, or even people from the same discipline might have sometimes difficulty understanding each other. So I don't know if this question here is actually, it's maybe I don't know if there is a good solution to it, yeah. But could there be something like finding, well, let's say finding common ground, maybe not in language such as mathematics. Maybe that would not even be a good thing, because diversity of languages, even in the literal sense, I think of something that I heard in a book by Robin Wall Kimmerer about languages that, even though very few people speak it, they have a unique way of expressing something that no other language can express in the same way. Maybe it's good to have different languages, but then there is still some difficulty. And so basically, this is an open question. Then also something that is a factor at CERN is, or at other large-scale research endeavors, is this idea of kind of flagship projects, yeah, whether it's the James Webb Telescope or whatever other. It might not necessarily be a physical machinery that is being built, but it could be any kind of flagship challenge or project. Could facilitate perhaps a shared sense of purpose. I remember also in a conversation with Amy, she used the term epistemophilia, somewhat related to this theme, but maybe as a standalone thing, like the love for finding something out as another kind of social glue. So maybe these could play quite nicely together. One, of course, doesn't have to lay all the eggs into one basket, so that's always the caveat here. But still, the question, could there be, or what could be, flagship projects or like ambitious research questions or programs for other fields? Maybe like for the field of contemplative research. Not that these haven't yet been formulated, but could they actually spawn, and would it be beneficial if they spawn an ambitious collaborative research endeavor? And so another moment for reflection. So here's a daunting question, but who knows? I mean, and you can think widely. It could be something more in a technical sense. It could be something in a more like humanistic or whatever sense. Yeah. What would be the most ambitious research question or program that you can envision with your wildest imagination and all your heart? So I'll invite again a bit of silence, and then to do this kind of exercise from before. So maybe I'll give some silence and see if something arises for you. And if nothing arises, then that's, of course, absolutely fine too. And hold, if you can, before you press enter. But feel free to write in the chat and not press enter, and then we will do it again all at once. Also so that one is not influenced by what others are writing. So this is a fun exercise. All right. So no pressure, of course. Maybe the time was too short. I think maybe the time was too short. But let's see. I invite you to type, not yet press enter, and then maybe just in a nutshell, you don't have to formulate the research program, of course. There's plenty of time to do that. Plenty of lifetimes, I hope. But for now, maybe just a headline. And okay, let's assume that I hope some of you are already ready, and let's press enter now. Let's see. All right. Seeing some things are coming. Consciousness not being a product of the brain, consciousness being primary and filtered by the brain. Research itself as the purpose of this species embedded in the universe. What about something along the lines of the Shamatha project that Alan Wallace and colleagues have been working on? Global citizenship, understanding consciousness as conscious lived experience. how to come to a common understanding of interdependence. Yeah. Yeah, all of these, I mean, vast questions and in that sense, very ambitious questions. So thank you very, very much. And of course, I don't want to say that such questions have to be funneled or kind of coerced into some kind of research program. But maybe, you know, it could happen. So I just want to stimulate possibilities here. Not trying to, of course, impose these ideas. But yeah, now another question. Maybe what we're seeing at CERN, even though it's like a very, very complex, technically extremely challenging, I didn't go into details, but I think several of you know or can imagine by analogy to other complex things, even something as complex as a mobile phone. I mean, how to design such a thing is way beyond me. And way beyond most people. But maybe what we're seeing at CERN is actually an easy challenge. So the question, could something like collaboration model or models that sometimes are being talked about in enthusiastic ways, mostly by people who know it when they work there and who have had a good experience. Of course, there might be a survivorship bias, but let's say there is something like a CERN-inspired way or model of collaboration that could be beneficial. Let's just assume that. Why aren't we already applying it to other domains? Or maybe it is being applied in various ways. Actually, there are some endeavors to that effect, indeed. But let's check in if it's an easy or a tough challenge. Not CERN itself has a unique history. It was kind of set up to become like this as a post-World War II project for the sake of peaceful international collaboration. The horrors of World War II were still present, the nuclear bombs, etc. But not just the nuclear bombs. Of course, physics has played other roles too. And yeah, there's certainly a great luxury in that CERN already being an established organization gets, although I am sure the negotiations aren't always easy, does get public funding from member states. And so it can sustain its program. Well, one can ask, well, if CERN gets that, well, couldn't something like some kind of research that we know or can aspire to in our field here could also get, yeah? And what might it take to get that? But indeed, there is the case that CERN gets it, yeah, and maybe other projects do so too. It has a long-established culture of collaboration. This is maybe not so much like academia and business. I mean, well, okay, let's not go into all the details here, but and maybe some of the things I'm writing here are not really making sense. But yes, yeah, the shared goal of a scientific breakthrough or breakthroughs is certainly maybe something that is helpful, but I'm not saying that this makes it an easy challenge. Anyway, let's see. Here I was just trying something, and this is pure speculation. Why aren't we already applying this in other domains? So what types of challenges might there be? So it's pure conjecture by me. I did the best to cast my ideas into this table. So I thought at CERN, there's a high technological challenge, a high analytical challenge, analyzing and finding ways to analyze the data and develop new analytical and statistical methods and whatnot. There's a lot of effort going into this. Of course, it's a high social challenge because humans are coming together. So I just take that as granted. And I was, yeah, kind of saying the organizational and financial challenge is high in principle, but already well established. Thus, I put it here as medium, just for the sake of the argument. And the epistemological challenge, by which I mean kind of finding consensus on what are even valid research questions, or how, you know, kind of with what methods and what kinds of formalisms are we going to address these questions, is, one could say, quite low. I'm sure people will disagree, especially theorists, but generally speaking, people are aligned on pursuing the same thing, and they're not debating so much about different views, or kind of theoretical or epistemological views, one could say. I hope I'm not abusing this term here. I hope you know what I mean. And here, just an effort. I mean, your mileage may vary, so you can kind of overwrite this mentally. But I thought the technological challenge generally at contemplative science is relatively low. I don't want to play it down, but to say, okay, I mean, in comparison, not all the effort usually goes into that part. The analytical challenge, analyzing the data that is being produced, is medium. Again, I might be wrong with this. Social, also high, humans. Organizational and financial, I would also say high, because it's not yet established. It might actually become less or medium in principle, because research in contemplative science, I think, is less cost intensive than in something like high energy physics, at least for now. And organizationally, well, I mean, there's some hope that I have that it could actually be helpful to have people, well, anyway, I mean, this is conjecture again, contemplative practitioners maybe are able to find it easier to organize. Actually, this is complete conjecture, so never mind. But I thought the epistemological challenge also would be particularly high because of the interdisciplinary challenges. Now again, your mileage may vary. I was just trying to stimulate some thoughts here. One factor that also came up in my considerations and conversations and so on, that I heard from many sides and also initiatives to that effect, the problem of academic overdrive competition. So there is also generally in science, in all fields, these issues with chronic publication and career pressure, scarcity of key resources, and consequences range from researchers burning out, leaving the field, the talent losing the talent, if you will. Yeah, of course, this is not a utilitarian way of saying it, but it's also a fact and an impact. Yeah, people under these pressures are sometimes find it difficult to embrace open science practices. Even though these would be quite, or could be quite helpful. I think this is, I mean, of course, there's a shift in that in the field. Yeah, and then there's just some pressures that lead one to try to optimize for metrics rather than quality, publication biases, etc. And the big problem, the potential problem, the privatization of academic research. It doesn't have to be, but often is a problem. Of course, one can argue about this. And collaboration has quite many facets, and I was thinking of these 3 key terms. It's very precious. Also look at our planet as we had a talk, the Mind Matters talk yesterday about Gaia and Lovelock and Margulis. Collaboration is essential if we think about also challenges that we are confronted with as humans. So we cannot really do it without, unless we will really kind of destroy ourselves and many other species in the effect. And it's also quite difficult, and it's not granted, like not any collaboration is actually working, and also not any collaboration is actually contributing to beneficial results. Just think of, yeah, wars are also forms of collaboration, but with what intentions and to what ends. And a summary of some of the principles that I thought should be part of such an endeavor. Please ignore this line about the poster session. There is no poster session today. So several, what you could say, systemic principles or key principles that could be helpful. A focus, I didn't go into this, of shared values and setting good intentions. A focus on practices, particularly contemplative and also scientific practices and processes, building community and harnessing also the expertise from members in community. And then there's this point, which I'm not going into, but maybe it speaks intuitively to some of you. It is an intuitive point for sure, is this pathways of wholeness. It's kind of not thinking from parts need to be reassembled to fix something and become whole again, but maybe one can shift the mindset somehow without neglecting the challenges, and say it is a pathway not towards wholeness, but as wholeness. And both science as well as contemplation or other wisdom traditions could be such pathways of wholeness. So maybe this is a bit more of a metaphorical point. Now I see that I'm way over time. I want to highlight, and I will not mention all of them, some key points. Marieke van Vught at ESRI 2015 asked the question to a panel, can't we just share our data? And the panel response was like, ooh, that will be difficult because yada, yada. And that was, for me, really a key moment. And so I really owe to Marieke van Vught also asking that question and just being able to listen to that question, and thereby being more inspired to pursue these thoughts and share them. Nathalie Legros has played an enormously important role also for ESRI and for MLE, I would say. At ESRI 2016, she basically introduced art of hosting practices to ESRI. And in the years afterwards, she and I and others were also supporting ESRI. She continued, and I started supporting in community building and hosting efforts. I mentioned Bruce Bowe, and I think he's still here, who has given wonderful, encouragement and support at various occasions, and for, maybe you could say, more a spiritual kind of support. And I will not explain it. I mentioned, but of course I could mention a ton of people, but these more well-known names would be Brother David Steidl-Rust and Father Francis Tiso, of course, who I think has joined, and Roshi John Halifax, and so on. Now then, there was one more, I think, during a meditation retreat, and here's something that I scribbled in my diary during a meditation retreat. This time not in Purek, but Piandei, Ciliegi in Italy. Then I unfortunately got a vision for a research center for contemplative collaboration or yoga science, is what I wrote in my journal. So there it is. Now I have exposed some of my complicated notes in my mind in German to the internet. But this drawing that you see here was a kind of idea. Suddenly it was like, what if there was a research center organized like a circle, or like these kind of segments of circle, like, no, I don't know the exact mathematical term for it, but you see what I mean. And for different disciplines and related research programs, maybe equivalent research programs, but different maybe contemplative disciplines, or however you want to combine. I actually thought there could be like Theravada Buddhists and Tibetan Buddhists and Zen Buddhists and Sufi mystics and Christian contemplatives and who knows what composition, each in one of these segments, doing research and in a way both collaborating and exchanging with each other while also doing their independent research program. Basically, kind of that was the picture. So maybe there's something in that picture, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. And so on the inside would be more the research and the kind of general socializing part, and towards the outside would be more the retreat areas and kind of like gardening and retreat, and then longer term retreat further outside, further removed, and so on. It's of course like it was a little spark, but yeah. To honor that, there are, of course, already ambitious endeavors around. Alan Wallace's Center for Contemplative Research comes to mind. The Shamatha project, I think Kev Saran and colleagues are still analyzing the data from more than 10 years ago. Resource project is another big one by Tanya Singer and others. There's something particularly interesting, and maybe Father Francis can say something to that if I manage to stop talking soon, about Dr. Henry Weiner's research and proposal for research into what he calls the healthy mind. I'll leave it there, and maybe something could be said. And ongoing efforts for a new monasticism somehow I feel is very strongly related to this. And again, Father Francis would be maybe the man to say something. Now I'll skim over this very briefly because I've completely blown the time budget, and I'm very sorry about this. These people coming together, basically thanks to Frank Schumann, who connected us, we formed a group called the Enactivists, which might have been like a proto version of what came later with the mindful researchers. And then these were voices from the contemplative research community at ESRI 2020 about how to integrate contemplative practice into the practice of science. loving science but struggling with the rat race culture of academics, or questions about putting self-reflection about the workings of academia on its own agenda. And thanks to such quotes, and again, some nudging and encouragement, especially from Frank Schumann, I shared a proposal or a draft for a proposal that I had already written for the Mind and Life conference in 2020 with people, and several people came together and collaborated on refining that proposal. Basically, mostly the people that you see here on the pictures. And out of this, eventually then came the mindful researchers with a couple of things like an initial survey, that a survey about what would be good survey questions, and several people contributed to that, formulating the questions and also kind of voting on them. And the main questions could be grouped into obstacles to bringing together contemplative research and professional research life, support, online community platforms, existential needs for community, and changes of the academic system, or what might be ingredients for such a thing as a contemplative collaboration. Altogether, there were more than 30 questions that we evaluated, so these were the top questions. So very briefly about the mindful researchers, it was basically around this question of bringing together research life and contemplative life, and also with an eye not only on practicing and living these questions and giving spaces for reflection, but also fostering perhaps changes or supporting changes of academic culture. Yeah, a mind map that I drew very early to think about this as a little bit more complex endeavor. And then there were lots of activities being facilitated mainly by a core team that I will briefly show soon. We mostly did so-called listening circles, a storytelling practice for deep reflection and deep listening, and also several others. Some of them came about by suggestions from people in the wider community, collective of mindful researchers. And then there was this more active gardeners subgroup that I want to highlight and give credit to. Also, we had a newsletter for a while. This was the initial circle of gardeners that were coming together: Annika, Dara, Francesco, Enrico, Mary, and myself. And then later on, Willeke and Nico, who is a cell biologist in Vienna. And basically, at the core of it was an emergent process and some elements that are also familiar, I think, for Mind and Life members. And many beautiful things that happened there. Colorful notes that Annika created and shared, often that captured the essence of our gardeners. And really amazingly, all these efforts were completely voluntary. There was also, and I want to highlight this before sort of moving fast forward towards the end, a related initiative is this proposal by Marieke van Vught and others that are listed at below, submitted to eLife, and it's on Mind Archive. I can share the link in the chat afterwards. Titled Beyond Kindness, a proposal for the flourishing of science and scientists, that talks about multiple crises that afflict academia, and to shift towards a collaboratively organized moral practice that puts kindness and sharing at its core. And then taking the Buddhist Brahma Viharas as inspiration and aligning them with what some could argue could be core values of science itself, and saying that such attitudes and practices that could shape or harness or cultivate such attitudes could actually be beneficial for science and for a flourishing of scientists and of science itself. Wonderful effort spearheaded by Marieke van Vught. Some future plans for the mindful researchers that I will just very, very briefly say. We're now very curious about putting innovative and innovation methods and participatory methods into the mix, and hopefully create something also called like a mentoring network, or maybe in collaboration with MLE or somehow, I don't know. But I'll jump over this because there is now very, very little time and I feel a little bit anxious to take all of it. But these are basically then would be the core pillars for going forward. In particular, here in a nutshell, something that we would call an incubation program to bring forth or to support creative potential and projects that are already in the community and that could benefit from support, from mentoring, from networking, from peer-to-peer matchmaking, etc. And so we're developing plans for that we hope we can start sometime soon after a quite long pause. Now, finally, there and back again, what would be, how could such endeavors, mindful researchers, but also many other endeavors, contribute to that larger aim of a flourishing science or to realizations of larger collaborative research programs? And for sure, some of these ingredients we hope could be part of this. Also, something that could be called a gradual familiarization with contemplative and collaborative and participatory methods as a kind of ongoing preparation in order to become more, become more ready, I would say, to undertake collaborative projects and to do that skillfully. And of course, it's very, very challenging. And also partnerships to other fields, including those with collaborative expertise. So a connection, I've always been dreaming of connections to CERN, and I've always been very shy, but there it is. Maybe there can be some bridges built between people at MLE and CERN, for instance, and I would be happy to stimulate that in some way. But yeah, it's like a big dream of mine, but also, all right. And all of it and all of that shared today could take, it's not happening today or tomorrow, could take years or decades, for however you see it, in your own way. So I wanted to return to this moment for reflection, and maybe it would be then a good way to end and take that into the discussion. Again, the question from the beginning: what would a contemplative, collaborative research culture be like for each of us, for you, as you can feel these words now? And what might it achieve for benefit of all beings? And how can we support its realization? And knowing that these are big questions, not to be answered lightly for anyone. I hope I haven't answered them lightly or have given the appearance of such. In lieu of a summary, strange paths and many connections coming together. All that I've shared is a product of all of that. And there are many related and adjacent and similar visions in the field, in adjacent fields, in other fields. And finding the others might be essential. Collaboration is not just precious and beautiful, I find, but also essential and difficult or challenging. So it's not easy just because it sounds good. But one can still dream big while taking small steps. And there is this quote by Francisco, I think, laying down a path in walking. I know it's like a trope almost if I just inject it here, but still might be a good guidance. And I thank you very much for the gift of your presence and for bearing with my extremely long talk. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, final quote that I like and find difficult to live up to, admittedly. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Wolfgang. We still have time for questions and discussion. Thank you.
I'm just reading the notes on the chat, so if someone wants to...
I would maybe have just a really quick reflection to jump in if no one else has a question right away.
Yes,
Just
please.
checking, there's no hands, yeah. I'm impressed by sort of the breadth of how you've thought about this and what came up for me was really a challenge that all of this points to, which is how do we value process over outcome, whether it's in science or the humanities or even contemplative practice. I mean, many of us know even in meditation, it's very difficult to release oneself from a striving, mentality. And I don't know if you've thought of the question in that way, but it seems to me like that's the challenge of our times. And how do you think about that, just in terms of how you go about your own work today, and reflecting on that, especially in science, which seems to me to be extremely outcome oriented? What were your thoughts be about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. Maybe it's the question, or a very big one. I definitely cannot claim to have any good answer to it. I appreciate the challenge to there needs to be the right kind of balance, and there will be no recipe. There was one thing that I remember from a conversation we had during the last ESRI planning of process quality reflected in the pragmatics or in the outcome, and the outcome quality reflected in the process. So, of course, this doesn't really say much, but maybe it also helps somehow. Like if process and outcome would be as a yin yang. Now, of course, I'm speaking more like a poet, perhaps. Yeah. If there is an imbalance, how can the missing ingredient be brought in, and not just as a token or a checkbox to tick it off? How can it be integrated? And then maybe that would be the question to pursue once there is a recognition, and hopefully not too much disagreement about such a recognition, or maybe even so. What can everyone do to bring that into balance oneself? And yeah, I guess everybody has maybe their precious thoughts on this, so I will pause on that. Is that like how? Yeah.
Bruce, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Wolfgang. I've been waiting for this talk a long time. I have always believed that this is a hugely important moment, and you have a hugely important part to play in the direction, I hope, that Mind and Life Europe is going to go. Just the last point there from Joanna, she raised a very important word, process. And I think since the early days of Mind and Life, we have come to understand that the mind is a process. It's not an entity. And a lot of the mechanistic, mechanical thinking, brain as computer, is superseded. And but then how do we explore that process? We have the philosophers, we have William James, obviously with the stream of consciousness. We have Whitehead, of course, very important philosopher to whom Gabor could talk to us maybe on another occasion if he was prepared to. We would love to hear from him. But where do we look for scientific evidence to match process? 1983, Varela said that he believed that science, spirituality, and the arts all had one thing in common: human creativity. That this was the most important thing, and we've come to understand that as far as time goes, we have only the present moment, or as one of the philosophers who influenced Whitehead, said we have what was the phrase that he used? Sorry. Never mind. We have a short duration of our present lived experience. And that's actually quite an interesting description of the present moment, which features in so much of philosophy. And we now have quantum physics, or quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics, and I have always relied within Mind and Life on yours and Michel Bipol's experience in these areas. I wouldn't at all call myself an expert, just a student trying to see where this might fit in. But I think as we come to a moment where we need to turn our research to something based slightly differently on process, then maybe we have to look at the quantum physics, the relationship between the wave, which is after all a process, and the particle, which is the electron, which is material. And of course, we've had the great excitement recently of discovering the Higgs boson particle within the Higgs field by the process of observation. And this, of course, brings in the whole concept of the observer affecting the outcome. I just think that you have been brought up on a system of slow science. I remember in Todu, we also talked with Andreas, a medical colleague and friend, about slow medicine, which was being explored in parallel. Obviously, we also had those wonderful conversations with Michel Bitbol about the exploring consciousness, the nature of consciousness, the relationship of consciousness. I think you come at the right moment, not from the hurly-burly of academic competition, not from the history of material mechanistic science, which I think at this stage can be replaced, superseded by quantum physics. There is an assumption that quantum physics only relates to the small, but that's not true. There's actually, as you know, 25 levels, and quantum physics simply supersedes mechanical physics at one of those levels and continues on out. And we've had the discussions yesterday about Gaia and what constitutes a living system. Others outside this area have taken it further in their support of Lovelock and suggested that we look at the whole universe. I'm thinking of people like Rupert Sheldrake here. But I do think that with the support from Mind and Life Europe, you could start to organize a research agenda. I know back in, I won't go on very much longer, November, that when we were talking with Professor Raffone, at the very end of the conversation, we had taken the conversation from a focused piece of research to a much more wide-ranging discussion on consciousness and the role of Mind and Life over its 35-year history. And I know Gabor expressed at the time that he would be very interested in somebody having a systemized look at the different facets, how collaborative research could be brought together by a facilitator who could see language difficulties, as you have already said, between different disciplines, and who could look at the biases that each of the individual disciplines have, and and that individuals have, let's face it, which would allow collaboration to proceed. And I'm given the fact that I'm promoting that research should come from somebody with some experience of quantum physics, I also noted Joanne's interest in interdependence there. And of course, we have two very basic quantum expressions. We have entanglement and complementarity, which could certainly be applied to interdependence. And the final synchronicity, and I will stop because I've probably gone on far too long. I just believe that you're the man, and that maybe somebody should look further at where Mind and Life Europe want to take their research. And you seem to have an understanding of the way that we can now work with the internet. We don't have to meet personally to collaborate anymore, although it's obviously the best, as you and I have enjoyed over the years. But the final thing, we first met at the International Symposium of Contemplative Science in Boston in 2014. And when you were presenting your paper, and I still actually have your white paper pinned to my desktop. But when I went there, the very first person I met was Arthur Zajon. And I just found the synchronicity of him saying to you, don't give up the physics, entirely appropriate to today. So there we have a third quantum principle, synchronicity, as Jung and Pauli discussed in great detail. So this is simply my answer to your third question. How could we take this forward? Thank you very much again for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
I don't know
Bruce.
if there's time for a brief response or like.
Of course, of course, of course.
I mean, I would thank you indeed very, very much, Bruce. And yeah, as you know, and I said, yeah, you've been a wonderful supporter for me on this journey too. Yeah, I feel a little bit anxious about all the praise. I would say I would see myself more as an enthusiast and not an expert, but I like to weave connections. I just made this note and thought I wanted to say this. So who knows what that can do. But two things that stood out for me while you were talking was the word facilitation. And I thought, although it's there, it just like became highlighted for me that a key part, and there I want to kind of put the spotlight back to Nathalie Ligos, who brought art of hosting and process facilitation into, in my experience, brought more effectively into the field of Esri and MLE, I think. That was a key moment. So good facilitation of processes so that exchanges can happen. Exchanges between disciplines, exchanges between even different views, etc. Well, in any case, facilitation seems like there seems to be like a very strong need there, I guess. I don't know. It's like I respond intuitively. And it also came to mind when you were talking about process and something about the attention to process. And just one thing came to my mind of, I don't know where it is going, but there is a particular interest and focus is particularly of some of the people that I've mentioned during the talk, who are very keen on an inquiry around process and process quality, if I can describe it like this. Annika and Mary and Willeke and Enrico. So I just wonder, just mentioning the names and dropping a seed here. But yeah. I don't know, I pause here. it will, yeah.
I think, excuse me, all this, especially this latest point that Bruce made and your response to that, Wolfgang, creates a lot of food for thought for us. And as you are a member of Mind and Life Europe, the association, and our internal circles and discussions, these types of questions are going to come up regularly and frequently in our meetings, even one tomorrow and another one in a month. So please keep attending these discussions and sharing your thoughts and ideas and vision. And you know that we at Mind and Life Europe are really supportive to this vision of the mindful researchers and the whole next phase of development that you envision. So I'm personally really looking forward to this next stage of implementation. You have been involved in incubation for years, and probably the time is coming soon, actually sooner than we would imagine at this point here, for making some of these ideas real and implementing them. So we are going to be there with you and for you, not only the MLE team, but also the whole community, and nurturing your vision, of course, as well as many other researchers' participation in this process that you are nurturing.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure, and yeah. I'm good with ideas and not good with implementation, but with collaboration it could work. So we'll see. May it bring some fruit and not make things worse in any way. One of the quotes that that I just remember and I wanted to mention from this woman who was running the meditation place in the early years when I was there. She was once asked, "What is the outcome of your practice?" She thought for a while and then she said, if I translate, "At least we don't make things worse." So I would be happy with that. But of course, the sky is the limit.
Yeah.
But thank you
Father
very
Francis has posted a comment in the chat, and I wonder if you would like to share that live as probably the last comment. No, no, not the last one. Petra is also going to share something. So Father Francis, please.
Yeah, it sounds like what Wolfgang is elaborating for us is how the act of doing research, this is the contemplative part of doing science, right? The act of doing research in itself impacts the coming together, is causative, you might say, of making things come together in the mind processes, right, which are complex and regenerative from moment to moment in an ordered yet fluid way. This constitutes a pattern. I almost tempted to say a fractal pattern on different levels that is repeated as we move through the contemplative, transformative labyrinth, right? As we move through that, which may or may not be temporal in character. I mean, there is this thing that changes us. The act of research changes us and brings us to a very special place, which for those of us who do contemplative practice, looks very much like where contemplative practice takes us from time to time.
Thank you. This is very much in line with the circulatory nature of dialogue between various fields that Francisco and Evan talked about in the embodied mind. And we were also experimenting within some of the events last year. So it's very much like a paradigm that we need to foster. Petra, please. Yours is the last question or comment, whatever you would like to add.
Yes, thank you, Wolfgang. I just heard your difficulty of implementing your research. Maybe the challenge is that you don't think about it in a linear manner, but in a testing manner, that you find yourself situations to test aspects of the research. And you know in beforehand that where having the situation to implement is an opportunity to observe what happens, to reframe the question and reiterate new situations. So that takes away maybe some burden of implementing a solution. It's not a solution. It's a situation to explore, to observe better, and it's a prototyping process.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. It's an ongoing experiment, like in the same feedback loop, I think, as Father Francis also just described in a, well, anyway, I see that's, yeah, true. That's very helpful. Thank you very much. And also thanks, Father Francis, for your sharing. Yeah.
Thank you, Wolfgang, and thank you all for participating in this MLE Friends talk today. It was quite a unique one, related to processes, related to ways of collaboration, and related to future visions. So it was really inspiring, and let's continue this journey. And I would just share some upcoming events and invite Joanna to talk about them just briefly as we are finishing this evening.
Just really briefly, so anyone who is not already aware of our Core in Action program, we're actually launching the second semester next Wednesday, and the first session will be a close reading of chapter 1 of the Embodied Mind, which we've already referred to, and we'll be working our way through the 6 chapters this spring, first 6 chapters this spring, and then the latter part of the book this fall. So you're welcome to follow it on the YouTube channel, live or after the recording, if you're not already part of the live Zoom room. So we hope you can continue following with us starting next week. Thank you to everyone again, and have a really nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Thank you all. Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you very much.